Do you have a paranormal encounter you'd like to share with us? Send us an email with your story for a chance of it being featured on Weird World. In this collection of 2 short stories, we revisit more paranormal police experiences, this time delving into some of the eerie and supernatural encounters experienced by law enforcement officers in small town settings. Like previous stories, these astonishing and unsettling accounts challenge our understanding of reality as the officers involved confronted unexplained phenomena that leave lasting impressions on their lives. Aswa. In the late 1980s, in a modestly-sized Oregon town with a history of Finnish settlement, an elderly man well known to his locals in the area resided in a Victorian-style townhouse typical of the early 1900s. Since he was 2 years old, he had lived in that house. Many believed that he and the house had grown to resemble each other, both becoming weathered and grey with time. Born around 1915, the man had witnessed many transformations in his house. Although not a recluse, maintaining a partially active social life, he was known to hold some notably racist views. Despite his opinions on race, however, the townspeople generally liked him. Unfortunately, the old man had received a terminal colon cancer diagnosis and had been given 6 months to live. The news deeply affected the community. The man spent considerable time saying farewell to his friends and making amends before his impending death. On the fateful night, the weather was chilly and clear. At about 3 a.m, the police received a call from a worried neighbour who hadn't seen the old man leave his home or turn on any lights for several days. Fearing the worst, 2 officers were sent to check on him. Upon their arrival, the flashing lights from the patrol car stirred several neighbours from their sleep, who then came outside to see what was happening. Realising the likely outcome, many began to weep. The officers entered the old man's house through the unlocked front door and were instantly greeted by a massive mounted elk head in the entrance. Its unsettling gaze seemed to follow them. Continuing upstairs, they discovered the old man lying on the floor next to his neatly made bed. After confirming his death, they called the station for an ambulance to transport the body to the medical examiner. At that time, the town employed only a few paramedics, so only one arrived on the scene. The paramedic asked the officers to assist him in carrying the body downstairs to the ambulance, and that's when things took a bizarre turn. As the 3 men carried the body downstairs, they seemed to struggle. It was then that the lead officer noted something strange about the elk head they had seen upon entering the house. It was no longer upright as before. Instead, it was tilted on its side. Beneath the head, a message inscribed in wet red lettering spelled out the word Aswa. The officer, feeling goosebumps, recognised the word from the Finnish language spoken by his grandparents. Aswa translates to stay or remain. Uneasily, he touched a bit of the red substance on the wall, sniffed it, and realised it was blood oozing from the elk head. Disturbed, he shouted to his partner and the paramedic to share his discovery. They too became terrified. The paramedic insisted they needed to remove the body from the house as quickly as possible and instructed the first officer to open the back of the ambulance to expedite the process. The officer agreed and rushed to the ambulance, but as his foot left the front porch, all sirens and lights on the vehicles suddenly went off, producing a blinding display of lights and ear-piercing noise that sent neighbours fleeing. Frightened, the officer flung open the ambulance door and monitored his partner and the paramedics' progress. They had just placed a stretcher with the body on the front porch when simultaneously every window in the house shattered inwards with a deafening crash. The officer near the ambulance observed the porch of the house collapse. It seemed as though the house had, as the officer had put it, simply given up. The entire porch and front of the house slumped forward, accompanied by the sound of ripping wood forming an incline up to the second-floor windows. Dust filled the air and people emerged from the homes to assist the officer in locating his partner and the paramedic. Navigating around the side of the collapsed porch and into the space between the fallen roof and the intact porch walls, he discovered his partner trembling and mumbling incoherently, repeatedly saying, "He sat up." After some time spent calming him down, the officer learned what his partner had witnessed. As the porch collapsed, the old man's body had seemingly clawed its way out of the body bag, emitting a horrifying scream. The first officer inspected the body bag, which was indeed shredded, and found the body sitting upright, its face frozen in a petrified scream. Horrified, the officer draped a tarp over the body to conceal it, and assisted his partner, who refused to approach the house again. The town's other ambulance arrived to help and transported the officer and paramedic to a trauma centre for injury assessment, while the first officer completed the paperwork, unsure of what to write. How does one report a house collapsing on its own and a dead body ripping itself from a body bag? The story has since become a local legend, and the house remains as it was that night. Nobody dares to disturb it further. The Changeling. Construction sites are frequently the backdrop for eerie tales, as unearthing new land may sometimes awaken ancient secrets better left untouched. These unearthed mysteries aren't always ghosts. They can be something even more peculiar. This particular account begins on a warm summer evening in the late 1990s at a suburban development situated on the outskirts of town. The development included partially built residences and a few fully constructed model homes for prospective buyers to inspect. During the day, the model homes were illuminated and equipped with functioning appliances to create a warm and inviting atmosphere. On the fateful night in question, a security guard was assigned to secure each property, deactivate all lights and appliances, and then head home. Due to recent incidents of theft, the construction company requested a nightly police patrol of the area. The officer responsible for the patrol was passing by the development at around 1 a.m. He anticipated the location to be dark since it had been secured earlier, but to his surprise, he noticed that all the model home lights were on. He contacted the dispatch centre, which connected him to the security guard, who assured him that everything had been turned off before he left. Suspecting mischief makers, the officer requested the security guard to return to the site with the keys. While waiting for the guard, the officer saw what he believed to be figures observing him from the upper window of one of the houses, and when he looked back, they'd vanished. Though this made him cautious, he dismissed it as the potential shadows cast by passing vehicles. The security guard arrived shortly thereafter, and the two proceeded to check each building together, securing them accordingly. There were 8 model homes in total, and aside from the lights and appliances being on, the first 3 homes were empty and even locked, adding to the mystery. However, in the 4th house, as they inspected the kitchen, there was a sudden click, and all the lights went off. It wasn't a power outage, since the other houses were still lit up, nor a circuit breaker problem, as all the appliances were functioning, and nothing had been tripped. The lights had simply switched off for no apparent reason. This sent a chill down the spines of both men, but after recomposing themselves, they attributed it to potential electrical glitch. A minute later, the lights flicked back on with another click. They laughed off their uneasiness, offering comforting speculations that perhaps new homes often experience such issues. They continued to rationalise the events until they observed that the lights in the next house were off and the television was now turned on. Casting a nervous look at each other, the guard and the officer were now convinced that something peculiar was unfolding. They proceeded to the next house, where the lights suddenly turned on and the TV was in standby mode, a state achievable only by manually accessing the console's dashboard. There was no evidence of anyone's presence, and nothing else appeared disturbed. Moreover, they hadn't seen anyone exiting the house while approaching it, even though such an intruder should have been noticed. The duo grew increasingly uneasy, and the darkness amplified their paranoia of movement in their peripheral vision. The guards switched off the house's lights and secured it, before moving on to the next 2 houses, which were uneventful. The 2 men started to feel relieved until they reached the final house. After turning off all the lights, they were about to exit when they heard a series of clicks upstairs, resembling someone rapidly toggling light switches. They both dashed upstairs, the officer with his firearm at the ready, only to find all the lights back on. Overcome with an eerie sensation, they searched the entire upper floor but found no one. The guard went around again, switching off all the lights, except for a dimmable hallway light. As he approached it, the light began to dim and brighten by itself. Thoroughly frightened, both men backed away from the light as it oscillated between dimming and brightening before abruptly shutting off. Deciding they'd had enough, the officer and the guard hurried downstairs, turning off the remaining lights and locked the door. As they made their way out, the officer caught a glimpse of a shape in his peripheral vision. When he turned, he was struck by an entity he later described as a dense dark form. The officer, a sizable man, weighed over 250 pounds and would have taken considerable force to knock down. The guard recounted witnessing a dark shape collide with the officer, then morph into a skunk upon landing. The shape-shifting didn't stop there, however, as it continued to transform into a Doberman, a bloodhound, a tan mastiff, and finally a golden retriever, before darting away into the night. The guard also reported that the number of audible footsteps didn't seem to match with the number of feet of the creature he observed. Neither the officer nor the security guard could explain the events that transpired that night, and both refused to return to the property.